I think there are two different kinds of people in the world. There are the kind of people who, when they're grocery shopping and they're going down the middle of the aisle and they notice that there's something they want to get, they leave their cart in the middle of the aisle, walk elsewhere, grab the thing they want to get, kind of unaware of anybody else. And then there are the kind of people who, as they're going down the grocery aisle and they see something they want to get, they move their cart as far to the right as is humanly possible, look both ways like they're about to cross the highway essentially, and make sure there's nobody around when they go get the thing. I think that this is a major thing in humanity, which kind of person you are. I came across a concept last week which I found really, really helpful for me, and so I want to be able to share it with you in the off chance that you might find it helpful as well. I came across this on a podcast, and I'm going to share the podcast as a link to this below. Essentially, the podcast is a conversation between two people that I do not know, a guy named Matt Fradd and a guy named Jimmy Akin, and they were having, I just came across it on Twitter, and I became absorbed in the entirety of the conversation. It was a conversation about COVID-19 vaccines, and they were discussing it purely from a Roman Catholic position, and so it was about the morality of whether or not you can use them. And so that's a whole thing, and if you want to listen to it, you can. But what I took out of the conversation was this terminology they use, which I'd never heard before, and I found fascinating and really, really helpful. And it was about what they called cooperation with evil. So there are ways of cooperating in the world, and there's this language that particularly Jimmy was breaking down, Jimmy Akin, and he said you can kind of break it down into two different categories. There is what they call, and hopefully this isn't too technical, but you'll stick with me, there's what they call formal cooperation with evil, and then there is material cooperation with evil. So if any of you are experts in this, you can correct me, because I'm by no means an expert. I've done a little bit of research since then. Formal cooperation with evil would be to essentially say what this person is doing, what this agency is doing is good. I affirm it. I want to do it. So they use elsewhere I've seen the example of an accomplice. So somebody who's robbing a bank, and then you have somebody who is an accomplice, somebody who is driving the getaway car. That person is formally involved in evil. But then there's something called material cooperation with evil. And that is when you end up via your person or via your resources being a part of something that is in effect evil, whether or not you affirm that it's evil, maybe even largely the fact that you don't even know that it's happening. So to use the bank robbery analogy, the person in effect who would have rented the car to the person who then is driving the getaway car, they were in effect, they've supplied something that became used in a robbery, and therefore they were materially involved in that evil. The example that Jimmy actually uses, Jimmy Akin uses in the podcast often, is he uses it like 8 times for some reason, is if you pay a guy $10 for pizza and then he goes out and uses that money on, say, pornography, you materially enabled him to be able to, say, engage in this particular sinful and evil act, but you had nothing to do with the formally approving it. So this is kind of comes out of like I'm drawing a blank on the name of the sort of way of doing kind of like law and thinking about things, but it's helpful. Some people would say, well, this is kind of like you're splitting hairs. But I find it particularly helpful, and I think it's helpful because we all have to wrestle with to what degree we're a part of enabling bad things that happen in the world. So going back to the grocery store person, I think there are people who are kind of blissfully ignorant and walk through the world not necessarily knowing whether or not what they're doing has any impact on anybody at all. To them, the word of God might be saying, hey, wake up and know that what you do actually impacts other people and it matters. But then to the other person who is like neurotically trying to get every centimeter and millimeter to the right they possibly can, so that everybody can get their cornflakes as quickly as humanly possible, and they're not affecting anybody. We have to realize that we do still operate in the world in a way that we can't control all of the impacts of our decisions. So if you had to guess what kind of person I am, I tend to be a kind of an overly analytical person. So like I would say that I end up sometimes people who are overly analytical can be prone to either inaction or to despair, or what I would call fright or flight. It's like they freeze up, and they sometimes they get analysis paralysis. They don't know what to do, and that's no way to live either. And so, what might all this have to do with Jesus, right? Well, in John 17, in what is often kind of called the high priestly prayer of Jesus, when he's praying for his immediate disciples, but also for those who are going to believe in him through their message, not long before he goes to the cross, there's a section starting at verse 14. It says, he's praying to his Father. He says, "Father, I've given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world." But here he says, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth." And then he says, "As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified." So if you've spent any time in Christendom or any time in the church at all, it's possible in the English world anyway, that you've heard the terms "in the world, but not of the world." And we often are, because there's the two different kinds of people, we will err on one side of that equation. We will err on the in the worldness, and we won't worry much about the kind of consequences and impacts of our witness and the way that we live, or we will emphasize the not ofness of it all, and we will be reclusive, we will pull back, we will kind of really bubble, and we will really not, we'll try to do everything we can to not interact with things that might be tainted, or things that might taint us, or things that seem evil. We often think of kind of monasticism or like kind of monkish culture, people pulled away. But that's a romanticization possibly that a lot of people who don't really know much about the monk system, they interact. Most monasteries, for example, would do business in the community. So they would make things, and then they would have commerce with people in the community. Or if you even go back to before there were monasteries, and you just think of these like crazy recluses who would go out to the desert and live by themselves for a long time, but they would the point generally was always to return to the world and then to interact with the world, because we are not of the world, but we are called to be in it. And because of that, it is impossible for us to not interact with evil. And so we need to have good language and good categories and good ways of processing what sorts of things we can do that are beneficial, what sorts of things we can do that will be helpful without being harmful at the same time. So formal cooperation with evil is to say that something that is bad is good, and that is bad. Material cooperation with evil is something that is in effect unavoidable, but once we see that evil is happening, we need to make sure that we choose how we're going to interact with it in ways that do not promote the evil and do not perpetuate the evil. So I hope that in some way, and I even put in a link here that you can take a look at a little more information about that particular concept. And this is not a promotion for either of those individuals on the podcast, nor for the person who wrote the article, because here's the great shtick: I don't know them. Much of the fact that maybe in some respects you don't really know me. We do this all the time. We vote for people whom we don't really know. We give money to people that we don't really know. We have no control over how they're going to use it. So that's a bit terrifying when you think about it. But at the end of the day, you have to go with the grace of God inside you. And once your eyes have been opened to situations, you respond accordingly. So like I said, I sent that information in the link. You can take a look at it. I hope this has been at least remotely helpful. If you have questions, or if you have pushback, or if you're just like, this is how you totally got that wrong, I'd be interested in hearing that, because I do want to learn and get better at this stuff myself. If you stuck with this whole 10 minutes, I think we're about 10 minutes now, then thank you very much. And either way, all the best, and may God bless you.